The studio lights burned bright across the polished floor of the Today Show as the crew scrambled to make last-minute adjustments with Savannah Guthrie reviewing her note cards and preparing for what was expected to be a candid yet respectful interview with Prince Harry, who had recently been making headlines again for his controversial memoir and latest docuseries. The tension behind the scenes was palpable, not just because of the royal presence, but because whispers among the crew suggested that Harry had made specific demands regarding off-limit topics, something Savannah, known for her incisive journalistic style, was never one to abide by. As the countdown to air ticked down, Harry emerged from backstage with his usual composed stride. Though the slight furrow in his brow hinted at a guarded mindset, the producers signaled go, and within moments, Savannah launched into the introduction, warmly greeting Harry and thanking him for joining the show before easing into preliminary questions. About his work with mental health veterans and climate advocacy, Harry responded with well-rehearsed poise, highlighting his charitable projects and family life in California. But the mood began to shift when Savannah transitioned into a discussion about public perception and recent backlash to his media ventures. She began referencing specific criticisms levied at Harry from both British and American commentators, asking if he believed he had done enough to separate genuine advocacy from personal branding. Harry seemed momentarily caught off guard, but quickly deflected, stating that his intentions were always rooted in helping others and shining a light on overlooked issues. Savannah, however, leaned in and gently pressed further, questioning whether the simultaneous monetization of trauma and public grievance diminished the authenticity of his efforts, and whether being a royal while also claiming victimhood sent mixed messages. Harry visibly tensed, his fingers folding tightly over his lap as he replied that people who judged him did not know the full story nor the private pain he and Meghan had endured. The crowd in the studio was silent, the air charged with anticipation. Savannah picked up on this shift and began referencing the sections of his memoir that had drawn the most scrutiny, especially the parts involving his family members, suggesting that some passages felt less like healing and more like retaliation. Harry's eyes narrowed and his tone sharpened. As he accused the media of weaponizing his words and twisting his motives, Savannah remained calm and asked if publishing such personal details, without giving his family a chance to respond, was a fair act of reconciliation. Harry scoffed, then clarified that his family had ample opportunity to engage, but chose silence, which he interpreted as complicity. The interview had now drifted far from its original tone, with viewers and crew alike sensing the building storm as Savannah challenged Harry's narrative about media intrusion. By pointing out the irony in his frequent appearances in new media contracts, Harry leaned forward in his seat, now his voice growing louder as he accused Savannah of echoing the same harmful narratives he had fought to expose, and asked her bluntly whether she too believed he should just be silent and disappear. Savannah responded that no one wanted him silent, but that consistency and transparency mattered, especially when advocating for truth. Harry retorted with a pointed statement that journalists rarely understood the pain of living under a microscope, and Savannah replied that journalists lived under scrutiny daily and still were held accountable for their words. The temperature of the exchange had now risen visibly, and producers in the control room were already discussing backup plans in case the segment derailed completely. Harry exhaled sharply, his composure now visibly shaken, but he insisted on continuing, calling the criticism of his actions a deflection from the real issues of race, mental health, and institutional silence. Savannah nodded and said those were important issues, but argued that the messenger mattered just as much as the message. Prince Harry's jaw tightened as Savannah Guthrie held her gaze steady, her voice calm yet resolute, as she pressed on, pointing out that while his advocacy touched on critical social topics, many critics argued that his message was often overshadowed by contradictions in his behavior. She referenced his public desire for privacy, followed by high-profile media appearances, book tours, and a multi-million-dollar deal with a global streaming platform, suggesting that such actions gave the impression of capitalizing on the very attention he claimed to escape. Harry bristled, his posture stiffening as he interrupted, saying it was not for anyone, including journalists, to determine how he processed his grief or told his story. Savannah raised an eyebrow, responding that When public figures chose to share personal narratives in a commercial space, they inevitably invited public scrutiny too, which Harry snapped back that scrutiny was different from malicious judgment and tabloid frenzy. Savannah countered that her questions were not personal attacks, but reflections of widespread public curiosity and concern. About the credibility of his message, the studio air is now heavy, the audience unsure whether to gasp or remain quiet. Harry took a deep breath before accusing Savannah of perpetuating a double standard, claiming that others in similar positions had not been held to such a high moral microscope. Savannah nodded slowly and calmly, asked whether he saw himself as above critique or simply misunderstood. Harry paused, clearly rattled, and then replied that he was exhausted from being misunderstood for trying to protect his family and shine light on systemic problems. While being constantly told he was doing it wrong, Savannah led a moment of silence. Hang in the air, then leaned forward to ask about the recent headlines involving his strained relationship with King Charles and Prince William, and whether he had made any efforts behind the scenes to mend those ties outside of the public eye. Harry hesitated before acknowledging that private communication had been attempted, but often went unanswered. Savannah followed up with whether he believed his public disclosures made those private efforts more difficult. Harry's face flushed and he began to shift uncomfortably in his chair before declaring that silence from the institution had only further isolated him, made his actions necessary. Savannah gently but firmly reminded him that trust within families often required confidentiality, and questioned whether trust could flourish when every disagreement became a headline. Harry fired back with frustration, arguing that protecting the truth was more important than protecting image, and that if truth caused discomfort, so be it. Savannah then asked him if he believed there was any part of his story that he wished he had kept private in hindsight, to which Harry appeared momentarily reflective before brushing the question aside, insisting that his story needed to be told in full, or not at all. The temperature in the studio continued to climb as producers gestured frantically behind the cameras. Savannah pivoted slightly and brought up the upcoming anniversary of Princess Diana's death, and asked Harry how he intended to honor her legacy in a way that avoided further media spectacle. Harry's eyes narrowed visibly, and he questioned the appropriateness of the question at all, suggesting it was a personal matter not suited for national television. Savannah responded that the public had always been part of Diana's story, and that many viewers felt emotionally connected to her memory and were curious about how her sons intended to keep that spirit alive. Harry's voice trembled slightly as he said he would honor her by protecting his wife and children from the same fate, by challenging harmful systems. Savannah acknowledged his pain but reiterated the importance of message delivery and the line between advocacy and performance art. As Harry sighed and looked away, the tension was undeniable. Asterisk.